The Volanthi Dominion had conquered 37 species across the galaxy, and they had never once failed in their mission to bring a world to its knees within 72 hours of first contact. Their method was simple and brutal, and it had worked every single time without exception. They would appear without warning, burn the major cities, break the spirit of the population, and then harvest whatever remained for their ever-expanding empire. It was efficient, and it was cruel, and the Volanthi had grown comfortable with their own power over thousands of years of domination on a clear September morning on Earth. 12,000 Volanthi warships tore through the fabric of space and emerged in the sky, above the blue planet that humans called home. The ships were massive and dark, and they blocked out the sun over entire continents as they took their positions. There was no warning, and there was no message, and there was no demand for surrender. The Volanthi did not believe in negotiation with lesser species, and they certainly did not see any reason to speak with the primitive creatures living on this small, wet world at the edge of the galaxy. The first plasma strikes hit London and Tokyo and New York and Beijing all at the same moment. And in the span of 3 terrible minutes, 800 million human beings died in fire and light and screaming chaos. The Volanthi commanders watched from their ships with cold eyes and calm hearts, because they had seen this exact scene play out on dozens of worlds before. Commander Vexer stood on the bridge of his flagship and observed the destruction with something close to boredom. He had expected this attack to be routine and simple, and he was already thinking about the reports he would file and the promotions he would receive for adding another world to the Dominion. But then something strange happened. Something that made the High Commander's 4 eyes narrow with confusion instead of the expected panic and chaos and desperate attempts to flee. The humans did something that no species had ever done before. Within 11 minutes of the first strike, every single nation on Earth that possessed nuclear weapons launched them all at once. Not at each other, as the Volanthi had observed humans doing in their surveillance, but upward toward the fleet. Vexer almost laughed at the pathetic attempt. The missiles were slow and primitive, and his point defense system swatted them out of the sky like insects. And he turned to his officers with a comment about the foolishness of these creatures ready on his lips. He never got to say it while every sensor on every Volanthi ship was focused on tracking the nuclear missiles. 3 quiet signals pulsed out from hidden bunkers in Colorado and Siberia and the Swiss Alps. These signals reached a network of satellites that humanity had placed in orbit decades ago. Satellites that officially did not exist. Satellites loaded with tungsten rods that could be dropped from space with devastating accuracy. 19 Volanthi cruisers crumbled and broke apart as the kinetic projectiles tore through them at impossible speeds. And for the first time in his 1,000-year career, High Commander Vexer felt something he did not recognize. It took him a moment to realize that the feeling was fear. The bridge erupted in chaos as damage reports flooded in from across the fleet. This was not supposed to happen. This had never happened. And the officers were shouting and arguing and trying to understand how a primitive species could have hurt them so badly so quickly. Sir silenced them with a raised hand and made a decision that he believed would end the resistance quickly and efficiently. He ordered the ground forces to begin immediate deployment, sending millions of Volanthi soldiers down to the burning surface to pacify whatever remained of the human population. Was the worst decision he would ever make. The Volanthi ground forces landed in drop pods across every continent, expecting to find broken survivors wandering through the ruins of their civilization. They expected crying and begging and submission because that was what every other species had done when faced with the overwhelming power of the Dominion. What they found instead was rage. Humanity was a species that had spent its entire existence fighting itself. They had wars in their blood and violence in their bones, and they had developed 1,000 different ways to kill each other over countless generations. When the aliens came and burned their cities and murdered their families, something ancient and terrible woke up inside every human being on the planet. Former enemies became allies in the span of hours. Russian soldiers fought alongside American soldiers, and nobody cared about the old conflicts anymore. Israeli and Iranian troops shared trenches and ammunition and targets. Street gangs merged with special forces units and formed guerrilla networks that moved through the ruins like ghosts. The Lanthi had superior technology and superior numbers and superior firepower. But they had never faced anything like this. On other worlds, the population collapsed psychologically after losing their cities. They became compliant and desperate and willing to do anything to survive. Humans were different. A young Volanti soldier named Korath found himself pinned down in the ruins of what had once been a school, surrounded by humans who had no weapons except broken furniture and rocks and their own hands. He transmitted a desperate message to his commanders that would later become famous throughout the galaxy. They keep coming and we kill 10 and 20 more appear. They are not soldiers, but they fight like demons. They are farmers and teachers and children, and they attack us with tools and pipes, and they die smiling. Why are they smiling? I do not understand why they are smiling. Korath did not survive to receive an answer across the burning world. Humanity fought with everything they had and everything they could find. When the ammunition ran out, they used knives, and when the knives broke, they used rocks, and when the rocks were gone, they used their bare hands and their teeth. Volanthi killed millions of humans in those first weeks. But for every human that fell, 2 more seemed to rise up and take their place. The death toll climbed higher and higher, and the humans only seemed to grow angrier and more determined deep beneath the mountains. In bunkers that had been built during the Cold War and expanded in secret over the decades. Humanity's greatest scientists and engineers worked around the clock. They dragged wreckage from downed Volanthi fighters into their laboratories, and they took the alien technology apart piece by piece. They studied the alloys and the power systems and the fold space drives. They analyzed the weapon signatures and the communication frequencies and the shield harmonics. They learned faster than any species in galactic history had ever learned, because they had no choice. Because their survival depended on understanding their enemy. The war on Earth would last for 3 terrible years. Over 2 billion humans would die before it was over. And the planet would be scarred and burned and changed forever. But the Volanthi had made a mistake that would cost them everything they had built over 10,000 years of conquest. They had assumed that breaking humanity would be easy. They had attacked a species that did not know how to surrender. A species that had been preparing for war since the first human picked up the first rock and threw it at another human. A species that would rather die fighting than live on its knees. The High Commander did not know it yet, but he had not started a conquest. He had started a war that would reshape the entire galaxy, and humanity was just getting started. 3 years after the first plasma strikes fell on Earth, the Volanthi High Command made an announcement that was broadcast across their entire empire. They declared that the conquest of the human homeworld was complete and that the surviving population of 4 billion had been successfully pacified. It was a lie. But they had told it so many times that they had almost started to believe it themselves. The truth was far more complicated. The Volanthi still controlled the major cities, and they still had millions of soldiers on the ground. But they had never truly broken the human spirit. The resistance continued to operate in the shadows, carrying out attacks and gathering intelligence and making the occupation as painful as possible. But the resistance was no longer the main threat. The real danger was growing in the darkness between the stars, in places the Volanthi had never. Taught to look, Admiral Amara Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the battleship Unity and watched as another human warship emerged from fold space to join the fleet. This one was called the Vengeance, and it was the 2,400th ship to be built in the hidden shipyards scattered across the solar system. Amara was a woman who had lost everything in the invasion. Her husband and her children and her parents had all died in the first strikes on Lagos. And for a time she had wanted nothing more than to die fighting on the ruins of her home. But General Stone had found her in the resistance networks and had seen something in her that she had not seen in herself. He had promoted her again and again, until she commanded the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. A fleet built in secret and crewed by survivors who all shared the same burning desire for revenge. The ships themselves were something new in the galaxy. They combined human engineering with stolen Volanti technology in ways that no one had ever imagined. They were faster and more maneuverable than Volanti warships, and they carried weapons that had been designed by people who had spent their entire lives learning how to kill. Dr. Chen Wei had led the weapons development program, and she had approached the task with the same cold efficiency that she had once applied to her research in theoretical physics. She studied Volanti physiology and psychology, and she designed weapons that would exploit every weakness she could find. The plasma cannons were standard, copied from Volanti designs, but improved with human modifications. The kinetic accelerators were adapted from the satellite weapons that had surprised the enemy fleet on the first day of the invasion. But the truly terrifying weapons were the ones Chen had invented herself. The neural disruptors could scramble Volanti brain chemistry from a distance, leaving them confused and helpless. The bioagents were tailored to attack Volanti's cellular structure while leaving other species completely unharmed. The electronic viruses could corrupt the hive communication networks that the Volanti used to coordinate their forces. And then there was the answer. Chan had never told anyone exactly how the answer worked. She kept the details in her head and refused to write them down. All that anyone knew was that it was a self-replicating gnatid swarm, designed to destroy everything that the Volanti had built without killing the Volanti themselves. When asked why she had designed it that way, Chen had smiled a smile that made even hardened soldiers uncomfortable. She explained that dead enemies could not suffer, and dead enemies could not spread fear, and dead enemies could not tell others what had happened to them. She wanted the Volanti to live. She wanted them to watch everything they had built crumble to dust. She wanted them to survive so they could spend the rest of their lives remembering what humanity had done to them. Admiral Okonkwo reviewed the fleet one more time and felt something close to satisfaction. 2,400 ships crewed by men and women who had lost everything they loved and who wanted nothing more than to make the Volanti pay for what they had done. She opened a communication channel to the entire fleet, and her voice was calm and steady as she spoke. 3 years ago, the Volanti came to our home without warning and without mercy. They killed billions of our people, and they burned our cities, and they thought they could break us. They were wrong. She paused and looked out at the stars that humans had finally reached. Today we begin our response. We will not stop until the Volanti Empire is nothing but a memory. We will not stop until every species in the galaxy knows what happens when you attack humanity. We will not stop until the universe understands that Earth and her children are not to be threatened. The fleet acknowledged her words with a roar of approval that echoed across every communication channel. These were people who had waited 3 years for this moment, and they were ready to unleash hell on those who had wronged them. Okonkwo gave the order, and the fleet activated their fold space drives in perfect synchronization. In an instant, 2,400 ships vanished from the outer solar system and reappeared at the edge of Volanti space. The target was Varth Prime, a peaceful agricultural world of 12 billion that had never known war and had never imagined that war could come to them. It was not a military target, and it was not a strategic target, but it was the first world that the Volanti had conquered 10,000 years ago, and it held enormous symbolic importance to the dominion the human fleet surrounded the planet and broadcast a single message on all frequencies. Okonkwo's voice was cold and hard and utterly without mercy. You struck first. Remember that. And then the answer was deployed. The nanite swarm spread across Vareth Prime like a silver tide. It did not attack the people, but rather everything they depended on. Power grids failed as the nanites consumed critical components. Water treatment facilities crumbled to dust. Communication networks went dark. Food processing plants simply ceased to exist within 3 days. A civilization that had stood for 10,000 years collapsed completely. The population was alive, but they had nothing left. No power and no clean water, and no way to call for help. Human dropships landed and deployed giant holographic projectors across the dying world. Images appeared showing the destruction of Earth cities, showing human children running from Volanthi plasma fire, showing the death toll counting higher and higher in numbers. Too large to comprehend, Okonkwo's voice echoed across the planet. We could kill every single one of you right now. We have the power and we have the will. And after what you did to us, we would feel no guilt. But we want you to live. We want you to remember. We want you to tell others what happened here. The fleet departed, leaving behind 12 billion traumatized survivors who had just learned that the Volanthi were no longer the most terrifying species in the galaxy. The Galactic Council received reports of the attack within hours, and they immediately sent demands for humanity to stand down and accept mediation. They threatened sanctions and blockades and collective military action. Ambassador Chen Wei-Lin, humanity's first representative to the Council, listened to their threats with an expression of barely concealed contempt. When they finished speaking, she stood and addressed the assembled delegates. Where were your demands when the Volanthi killed 1 billion humans in 3 minutes? Where were your sanctions when they burned our cities and murdered our children? You watched, and you did nothing, and now you dare to lecture us about proportional response. She leaned forward, and her eyes were as cold as the void between stars. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. Humanity is coming for the Volanthi, and nothing in this galaxy will stop us. You can either stay out of our way, or you can learn what the Volanthi are about. To learn, the choice is yours. She walked out without waiting for a response. And behind her, the council erupted in chaos and fear. The human fleet was already moving toward its next target, and the Volanthi Empire was about to discover that they had awakened something far worse than they could have ever imagined. The Volanthi had built their empire over 10,000 years of conquest, and they had grown comfortable in their power. They had crushed 37 species and absorbed countless worlds, and they had come to believe that they were unstoppable. The human counterattack shattered that belief completely. World after world fell to the human fleet in a campaign of destruction that moved faster than anyone had thought possible. The Volanthi commanders could not understand how the humans were doing it. Their ships appeared from nowhere and struck without warning, and then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Admiral Okonkwo had studied human military history extensively, and she had learned from the greatest generals her species had ever produced. She used tactics from Napoleon and strategies from Sun Tzu and innovations that she had developed herself. The Volanthi had never faced anything like her. The second world to fall was Kethrin Station, a massive military base that housed 2 million soldiers and 300 warships. Okonkwo hit it with everything she had, coordinating attacks from 12 different angles, simultaneously and overwhelming the defenders before they could organize a response. The battle lasted 7 hours, and when it was over, the station was a burning wreck and every Volanthi ship had been destroyed. UN casualties were minimal because Okonkwo refused to waste her people in frontal assaults. She was patient and methodical and utterly ruthless in her efficiency. But it was not just the military targets that suffered. The human fleet attacked the infrastructure of the Volanthi Empire itself. Supply lines were disrupted and communication relays were destroyed, and trade routes became too dangerous to travel. The economic damage was devastating. Worlds that had depended on imports began to starve. Factories shut down because they could not receive raw materials. The carefully balanced system that had supported the Dominion for thousands of years began to collapse under the pressure. High Commander Vexer watched the reports come in and felt his empire crumbling around him. He had been so confident when he ordered the attack on Earth, and now everything he had worked for was being systematically destroyed by the very species he had tried to conquer. He ordered a massive counterattack, gathering every available ship into a fleet of 8,000 warships that would crush the human forces once and for all. It was the largest Volanthi fleet ever assembled, and Vexer was certain that it would end the war. The two fleets met in the empty space between stars, and what followed was the largest battle in galactic history. 8,000 Volanthi ships against 2,400 human ships. The numbers should have guaranteed a Volanthi victory. They did not. The human ships were faster and more maneuverable, and their crews were motivated by a hatred so deep that it bordered on madness. They fought like demons, and they died like heroes, and they took dozens of Volanthi ships with them for every human ship that was destroyed. Admiral Okonkwo commanded from the bridge of the Unity, and she was everywhere at once, coordinating attacks and redirecting forces and exploiting every weakness in the Volanthi formation. She had been waiting for this battle her entire life, and she was not going to lose. The turning point came 6 hours into the engagement, when the human fleet deployed a new weapon that no one had seen before. It was called the Cascade, and it was Dr. Chen's second masterpiece after the Answer. The Cascade was a modified version of the neural disruptor scaled up to affect entire ships. When it activated, it sent a pulse through the Volanthi hive communication network that scrambled the thoughts of every Volanthi in range. For 30 seconds, 8,000 crews forgot how to operate their ships. 30 seconds was more than enough. The human fleet tore through the confused Volanthi formation like wolves through sheep. They destroyed ship after ship while the crew stumbled and struggled to remember who they were. By the time the effect wore off, 3,000 Volanthi ships were burning. Reykjavik Tsar watched in horror as his fleet was torn apart around him. He ordered a retreat, but it was too late for most of his ships. The humans pursued without mercy, hunting down fleeing vessels and destroying them one by one. When the battle was finally over, the Volanthi had lost 6,000 ships and the humans had lost 400. It was a victory so complete that it changed the entire war. The Volanthi would never again be able to challenge humanity in open combat, but Okonkwo was not satisfied with military victory alone. She wanted the Volanthi to understand what they had done, and she wanted them to suffer for it. She continued her campaign across Volanthi space, targeting the symbols of their empire and the foundations of their pride. The Monument of Conquest was a massive structure on the Volanthi homeworld that displayed trophies from every species they had conquered. Okonkwo sent a strike team to destroy it, and they left behind a holographic message that played on repeat for days. These trophies belong to peoples you murdered and enslaved. We are returning them to history where they belong. You will build no more monuments because you will conquer no more worlds. The Temple of Victory was a religious site where the Volanthi celebrated their greatest military achievements. Human special forces infiltrated it and planted explosives that brought it crashing down. The message they left was simple. There is no victory here anymore. There is only the memory of your crimes. Every attack was designed to hurt the Volanthi psychologically as much as physically. Okonkwo understood that breaking their spirit was just as important as breaking their military. She wanted them to feel the same helplessness and despair that humanity had felt when the plasma strikes first fell the galactic Council watched in growing horror as the human campaign continued. They sent more demands and more threats, but humanity ignored them completely. Ambassador Chen Weilin stopped attending council sessions entirely and refused to accept any communications. Several elder species proposed forming a coalition to stop humanity before they became too powerful. They argued that the humans were becoming a greater threat than the Volanthi had ever been. The proposal was voted down because no one wanted to be the first to challenge the species that was dismantling an empire instead. Something unexpected began to happen. Species that had been conquered by the Volanthi thousands of years ago started sending secret messages to humanity, offering support and assistance. They provided intelligence about Volanthi defenses and supply routes and weaknesses. The Cathari, who had been enslaved for 8,000 years, sent a delegation to Admiral Okonkwo personally. Their leader, an ancient being named Solaith, knelt before her and spoke words that made the Admiral's eyes fill with tears. For 80 centuries we prayed for someone to free us. For 80 centuries no one came. You came. You are bleeding and dying to destroy those who enslaved us. We do not have ships or weapons, but we offer you everything we have. We offer you our loyalty forever. Okonkwo lifted Solaith to his feet and promised that the Cathari and every other enslaved species would be free before the war was over. It was a promise she intended to keep no matter the cost. The human fleet pressed on toward the Volanthi homeworld, leaving liberated worlds and burning military bases in their wake. The end was coming, and everyone in the galaxy knew it. The only question was how much the Volanthi would lose before they finally accepted defeat. High Commander Vesser received reports every day showing the collapse of everything his species had built. He had started this war believing it would be easy, and now he was watching his empire die. He began preparing for something that no Volanthi had ever imagined. He was preparing to surrender. The Volanthi homeworld was called Volanthar, and it had been the heart of the Dominion for over 15,000 years. It was a beautiful world of purple oceans and silver forests and cities that stretched toward the sky like monuments to power and pride. 20 billion Volanthi called it home. When the human fleet arrived, they did not immediately attack. Instead, Admiral Okonkwo positioned her ships in orbit and waited. She wanted the Volanthi to see the force that had come for them. She wanted them to understand that everything they had built was about to end. The waiting lasted for 3 days while the Volanthi High Council debated what to do. Some wanted to fight to the last soldier, while others argued for negotiation. High Commander Vexer sat in silence through most of the debates because he already knew how this would end on the 4th day. The humans began their assault. They did not use nuclear weapons or planet-killing strikes because they did not want to destroy Volanthar. They wanted to break it. They wanted to humiliate it. They wanted the Volanthi to live with the knowledge of their defeat for the rest of their existence. The orbital defense platforms were destroyed first, picked apart by precision strikes that left nothing but debris. Then the military bases were hit one by one, their weapons disabled and their soldiers forced to evacuate. The human fleet moved with perfect coordination and overwhelming force. Then the answer was deployed once again. Nanite swarms spread across Volanthar like a silver plague, and it consumed everything that made modern civilization possible. Power plants crumbled and water systems failed and communication networks went dark. In the span of 16 days, a world that had ruled the galaxy was reduced to a pre-industrial state. The Volanthi people watched their cities go dark around them, and they finally understood what they had done to Earth. They understood what it felt like to see everything they loved destroyed by an enemy they could not stop. They understood the despair that came with absolute helplessness. The High Council emerged from their bunker on the 17th day and requested terms of surrender. They were met by Admiral Okonkwo herself, who had come down to the surface with a guard of human soldiers. Vexer was among the council members, and he looked at the human Admiral with eyes that held no hope and no pride. He was old and tired and broken, and he wanted only for the dying to stop. He spoke first because no one else had the courage. "What do you want from us? What will make you stop?" Okonkwo regarded him with an expression that held no mercy but also no cruelty. She was not here for revenge anymore. She was here for justice and security, and the guarantee that humanity would never face this threat again. The terms are simple. Your fleet will be dismantled completely. Every warship will be destroyed. Every weapon will be melted down. You will have no military capability whatsoever. The species you conquered will be freed immediately and given full sovereignty over their own worlds. Your empire is over. Vexer nodded slowly. He had expected this much. It was the price of defeat, and what else? Humanity claims the right of proportional response against any species that attacks us first. The nature of that response will be determined by us alone without negotiation or limitation. If anyone threatens Earth or our colonies, we will do to them what we have done to you. The council members shifted uncomfortably, but they had no choice. They signed the surrender documents, and the 10,000-year Volanthi dominion came to an end in a single afternoon. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Species that had lived in fear of the Volanthi for millennia celebrated in the streets. Worlds that had been enslaved for thousands of years declared their independence. The entire galactic order shifted in a matter of weeks. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address the new reality. There was fear in the chamber because everyone understood that humanity had just proven itself to be the most dangerous species in existence. Several delegates proposed sanctions or containment measures. Ambassador Chen Weilin attended this session, and she stood before the assembly with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how much power she represented. Her speech would be remembered for centuries. "I know you are afraid. I know you look at what we did to the Volanthi, and you wonder if you might be next. I am here to tell you that your fear is understandable, but unnecessary." She paused and looked around the chamber at the representatives of 100 different species. Humanity does not want war. We never wanted war. We wanted to live on our small blue world and look up at the stars and wonder about what was out there. The Volanthi took that from us. They came to our home and they murdered billions of us, and they tried to enslave the rest. Our voice grew harder. We responded the only way we know how. We fought back with everything we had, and we did not stop until the threat was eliminated. That is who we are. That is what we do when someone threatens our existence. She spread her hands in a gesture that was almost welcoming. But we are also capable of great friendship and generosity and loyalty. The species who helped us during our war will find that we remember our debts. The Cathari and the others who stood with us will be protected and supported for as long as humanity exists. She lowered her hands and her expression became grave. So here is the choice we offer to the galaxy. You can be our friends and trade with us and learn from us and grow with us. You can share in everything humanity has to offer. Or you can try to threaten us and discover what the Volanthi discovered. Her final words echoed through the chamber. We are not monsters, but we are not victims either. We will defend ourselves and our children with every tool at our disposal. So choose wisely. The galaxy is watching. The Council voted unanimously to grant humanity full membership and territorial sovereignty. No one proposed any action against Earth. No one wanted to test a species that had broken an empire. In the years that followed, humanity spread across the stars. They established colonies on worlds that had never known sentient life. They formed alliances with dozens of species who found them to be generous and curious and surprisingly kind. They became known as fierce protectors of the weak and implacable enemies to any who would threaten the innocent. But they never forgot what had happened to Earth. Every human child learned the story of the invasion and the war that followed. They learned about the billions who had died and the heroes who had fought and the price that had been paid for humanity's place among the stars and every species in the galaxy. Learned a simple truth that was passed down through generations and across civilizations. It became the first rule taught to young diplomats and military officers and anyone who might one day encounter the strange creatures from the small blue world. The rule was simple, and it was absolute, and no one ever forgot it. Never attack humanity first. Never threaten their children. Never assume they will surrender, because they fought their way to the stars through blood and fire, and they will burn the galaxy down before they let anyone take their future away. The Volanthi had learned this lesson too late. They survived as a species, but their empire was gone and their pride was broken, and they spent the rest of their existence as a cautionary tale for anyone foolish enough to underestimate the humans. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, Admiral Amara Okonkwo retired to a small colony world where she could finally rest. She had done what she set out to do. She had made the galaxy safe for humanity. She had made sure that no one would ever strike first again. She spent her final years watching the stars and remembering all those she had lost and all those who had fought beside her. She died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 94, surrounded by family and friends who loved her. Final words were simple, and they were engraved on her tomb for all eternity. We came in peace. They chose war. We finished it. The galaxy remembered. The first year of the occupation was the bloodiest period in human history, and the Volanthi learned very quickly that they had made a terrible mistake in coming to this small blue world. Every day brought new horrors and new surprises and new reasons to question everything they thought they knew about. Conquest Commander Thalax was given control of the European sector, and he arrived with 50,000 soldiers and the absolute confidence that he would have the region pacified within 2 weeks. He had conquered 6 worlds before this assignment, and he considered himself an expert in breaking the will of primitive species. On his 3rd day on Earth, a group of elderly humans attacked his command post with farming equipment and homemade explosives. They killed 19 of his soldiers before they were stopped, and as Thalax stood over the bodies of these old men and women, he noticed something that chilled him to his core. They were smiling, every single one of them, and their dead eyes held no fear and no regret. He filed a report that night asking for reinforcements, and his superiors laughed at him. How could a commander of his experience need more troops to control a population of broken survivors? They asked. It was embarrassing and shameful, and they denied his request. 3 weeks later, Thalax was dead. A teenage girl had walked into his headquarters, wearing a vest packed with explosives, and she had looked him directly in the eyes and smiled before pressing the detonator. The blast killed Thalax and his entire command staff across the planet. Similar stories played out every single day. The Volanthi had technology that could level mountains and weapons that could vaporize entire city blocks, but they could not stop a species that had decided it would rather die than submit. The resistance. Networks grew stronger with each passing month. Humans who had spent their entire lives as enemies now worked together with perfect coordination. A former American CIA agent shared intelligence with former Russian FSB officers. A British Special Forces soldier trained fighters alongside veterans from a dozen different nations. They learned to use the alien technology against its creators. Captured Volanthi weapons were reverse engineered and copied and distributed. Communication frequencies were intercepted and decoded. Patrol routes were mapped and ambushes were planned with careful precision. General Marcus Stone became the face of the resistance, though he never sought the role. He had been a 3-star general in the United States Army when the invasion began, and he had lost his wife and 2 daughters in the first strike on Washington. Stone did not let his grief consume him. Instead, He channeled it into something cold and hard and utterly focused. He united the scattered resistance cells into a single coordinated network, and he developed tactics that made the Volanti bleed for every inch of ground they tried to hold. His most famous operation was the Battle of the Rhine, where 6,000 human fighters faced off against 20,000 Volanti soldiers. The humans should have been annihilated in minutes, but Stone had prepared the battlefield for weeks in advance. Every bridge was rigged with explosives, and every building was a potential ambush point, and every street was a kill zone. The Volanti advanced into what they thought was a simple cleanup operation, and found themselves trapped in a nightmare of fire and death. When it was over, 4,000 Volanti soldiers were dead, and the survivors were in full retreat. Stone lost 2,000 fighters, but the victory sent shockwaves through the occupation forces. If the humans could do this once, they could do it again, and again. And again, the Volanti High Command responded by ordering massive reprisals. They burned entire towns and executed thousands of civilians and broadcast the destruction across all frequencies as a warning to others. They believed that terror would break the human spirit once and for all. They were wrong. For every town they burned, 10 more resistance cells formed. For every civilian they executed, 100 more humans picked up weapons and joined the fight. The reprisals did not create fear, but rather a cold and burning hatred that spread through the population like wildfire. The Volanti intelligence officer named Sareth was tasked with understanding the human psychology, and she spent months studying captured prisoners and intercepted communications. What she found terrified her so much that she had trouble sleeping. She discovered that humans had a concept they called spite, a willingness to suffer harm to themselves in order to harm their enemies. No other species in the galaxy had this trait, and Sareth realized that it made humans uniquely dangerous. They would burn their own homes to deny shelter to invaders. They would starve themselves to deny food to occupiers. They would die in flames if they could take just one enemy with them. She wrote a report recommending immediate withdrawal from Earth, arguing that the planet could never be successfully occupied, and that every day they stayed only made the eventual reckoning worse. Her superiors dismissed her as a coward and assigned her to frontline combat duty as punishment. She was killed 3 days later by a 12-year-old boy with a sharpened piece of metal. Meanwhile, in the hidden bunkers beneath the mountains and the oceans and the ice, humanity was building something that would change everything. Teams of scientists and engineers worked without rest, driven by grief and rage and the desperate need to strike. Back at their tormentors, the Arelena Vasquez led the team that cracked the Volanti Fold space drive. She was a physicist from Argentina who had lost her entire family in the first hour of the invasion. And she approached the alien technology with a mixture of scientific curiosity and burning hatred. The Fold space drive was supposed to be impossible for primitive species to understand. It manipulated dimensions that most species could not even perceive, and it required materials that could only be synthesized in the hearts of dying stars. The Volanti had spent 3,000 years developing it, and they were confident that no conquered species could ever unlock its secret. Selena and her team did it in 14 months. They built their first Fold space-capable ship in a cavern beneath the Rocky Mountains. It was ugly and crude, and held together with welding and hope. But when they activated the drive, it worked. The ship vanished from Earth and reappeared near Jupiter, exactly where they had calculated humanity had just joined the interstellar community, and they were not coming in peace as the second year of occupation began. The Volanti started to notice something strange. Their casualty rates were climbing, but the human population was not decreasing at the expected rate. Their supply lines were being disrupted by attacks that seemed to come from nowhere. Their communication networks experienced glitches and failures that their engineers could not explain. They did not realize that humans were already in space. watching and waiting and preparing. They did not realize that the resistance on Earth was no longer fighting to survive, but rather fighting to buy time. They did not realize that the most dangerous species in the galaxy was about to show them what real war looked like. High Commander Vexer, who had started this invasion with such confidence, began to have nightmares. In his dreams, he saw human faces, smiling and bloody and utterly without mercy. He woke up screaming more nights than he would ever admit. His nightmares, he would soon discover, were not nearly terrible enough to prepare him for what was coming. Asterisk.